kids.
A minute ago, you said you didn't care if he drinks.
He said a little drink.
You're tearing me apart!
What?
You say one thing, he says another, and everybody changes back again!
That's a fine way to behave.
Well, you know who he takes after.
Oh, James Dean. I had no idea until I finally watched this film that's probably the origin of You're Tearing Me Apart, Lisa, in the room.
I had no idea. He's
That's
so goofy
crazy.
in this movie. He's
such
goofy.
a weirdo.
Total goof.
I was not expecting that.
He doesn't come across as like, growing up with the image or the icon of James Dean, it's always like ultra cool. He's not that cool in this movie. He's kind of a weirdo.
It kind of made me think of like the image of Brad Pitt versus like Brad Pitt's usual like weirdo goofball performances.
Yeah.
Where it's like he's got that, sleek kind of
like Speed Train?
Bullet Train. What should you call it? Speed Train?
Whatever, same thing. You know what I was talking about.
Yeah. But like then you actually like let him do his thing on camera and he can be super idiosyncratic and
fascinating guy. There's a lot going on behind him, just in general as a person.
Yes.
This is Film Trace, folks. This is where we trace the life of a film from conception to production all the way to release and reception. It is the final episode of our set in the 1950s cycle. We are doing Cool Hand Luke from 1967, and you heard from the clip there, Rebel Without a Cause from 1955. It's been a long journey, this one, I feel like, Chris, right?
Yeah. This is definitely kind of, it's the first themed season where we had 7 episodes instead of 6. And it has also just been like, we've been trekking along since Asteroid City came out back in June.
Yeah.
And I don't know. It's been quite the summer and into September. I think we should maybe do a quick recap before we jump into Cool Hand Luke.
Yeah, let's do it. I'd love to do it. So episode 1 was Asteroid City and the Fablemans. That was a good episode. Interesting juxtaposition, those two movies. Then we did, for the 2010s, Tree of Life and The Master. We had Ryan and Molly on for that episode. And then for the 2000s, or the Audies, as I call them, Far From Heaven 2002, and then The Majestic. That was a fun episode with Brian Egert, right?
Yes.
And then what did we do in the 90s? LA Confidential and This Boy's Life. And then in the 80s, we did Desert Hearts and a Diner. Molly came back for that one. And then the last episode we did it with Andrea, The Last Picture Show, and Lenny, the Lenny Bruce biopic from 1974. So yeah, it's when we started out on this one, because we wanted to do Asteroid City. And I was like, it doesn't really sci-fi maybe, but they're like, let's just do set in the 1950s as kind of like a decade thing and see how the depiction of the decade has changed since, the aforementioned decade in and of itself. And we're ending with Rebel Without a Cause, a movie from the actual decade itself. And it's been, it's been a weird journey, because the thing about it is the 50s has so many different layers and flavors to it that I was wanting there to be some sort of connecting thread by the end, but I don't know that there is, right? I don't know if you felt that. Maybe these two movies changed that. I don't know.
I have 2 theories I want to posit for you. First of which is a little more surface level. I think, and maybe it's just this somewhat, arbitrary sampling of films throughout the years. I think with the exception of a couple titles, it feels like, I want to say that like the further away that cinema got from the 1950s, the not so great it became at capturing that feeling. I personally think that Desert Hearts and Last Picture Show were probably the best, not only films overall, but also did the best job at showing and like giving this kind of portrait of two very different but equally important and kind of heart-wrenching like slices of Americana. And I think that there's definitely, like, I liked a lot of the movies. We went over later, closer to present day, including Asteroid City, but that in itself had so much to do with artifice because it's Wes Anderson, and it was set in the 50s, but also was like a play within a play. Yeah,
a lot of layers to it.
Fabelmans is like this autobiographical thing of, you know, like the quintessential boomer filmmaker. Yeah. And so it's just like, it gets way more meta, you know, as time goes on. Very meta,
yeah.
Far From Heaven is a facsimile, right?
Oh my God, yeah.
What was that?
Douglas Sirk.
Douglas Sirk. I was going to say Fairbanks. I was like, wrong Douglas. So I'm curious. Okay, that's my first one. So I want to hear your thoughts on that. But while it's fresh in my head, let me tell you the second one. Maybe you can break down my possible theories.
Rip them apart.
Dissect and deconstruct with vitriol. So this one's maybe the spicier one.
Okay.
Because it didn't really hit me until I was doing some background reading on Cool Hand Luke, and it seems to be that the connective thread, if there is one, that I think is maybe even stronger than the more surface level, like, portrait theory, is that every single one of these movies, either in good, bad, complicated ways, is essentially showing this kind of it's depicting rebellion against the status quo. And the 1950s very much, you know, once again, surface level wise, you know, we think about stereotypes, just like we think about like the iconography of James Dean. Mm-hmm. We're told that it's like, you know, the picture perfect, like, this is the birth of like the American suburban family and all that, like, post-war kind of thing. And the thing that cinema, especially like the cinema that has stood the test of time, it does is kind of peel back and suggest that this wasn't so much of a settling into norms as it was like a last gasp of rebellion against like institutional oppression.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I think that's the one strand that I did gather is this sense of rebellion.
Yeah.
Right. And it's almost in like most of them, I mean, like the Master, without a doubt,
mm-hmm.
you know, this sort of vagabond rebellion against like any nature of a normal life. This Boy's Life, I mean, right in your face, the rebellion against an authoritative father. Last Picture Show, you know, Lenny, especially these last two movies, Cool Hand Luke and Rebel Without a Cause. It's funny you mention this because that is the exact thing that I was thinking about when trying to kind of connect the dots of these movies. But like I sense that there's this connective tissue of rebellion against institutions. But I would say that like the rebellion to me is a little bit more nebulous than that, right? In the sense that like one of the things I struggle with is somebody who doesn't have a big connection to this decade whatsoever. You know, we were both born in the 80s, so a good 30 years after this actually happened. But I couldn't, like, Cool Hand Luke, Rebel Without a Cause, I struggle with this sense of rebellion and what it is they're fighting against. Because in our lives and coming up when we did, there's always been this very stereotypical fight against the man, mm-hmm. or, you know, any institutions that exists, or any sort of like collective organization that exists. And to me, I don't know, it actually kind of signals something, I think, pretty negative.
Yes.
Like,
yes.
This sort of, I don't know, it's almost
tragic.
There's a tragedy. Well, I think maybe you're seeing it in a different way that I see it, though.
Oh, okay.
Tragedy in the sense that, you know, if you ask anybody, like, what makes an American, like, one of the things that's going to pop up over and over again is like this really, really strong sense of individuality. This idea that you can carve your own path in life and you can make your own way and create somebody, whoever you want to be, essentially. That's an American idea. That does not happen in most places in the world. They don't think that way. And that you see that the root of that ideology in these films, where these people are making their own way and they're sort of, hacking their way through life, creating their own path. But the thing that sticks out to me, and I go back to like Cool Hand Luke, especially, and Rebel Without a Cause to a lesser degree, it's sort of like, what is the target of their derision? What is the target of their discontent? I mean, especially when we look at Cool Hand Luke, here's a guy who is essentially in prison for what? Not that long, maybe 3 years. I mean, like 3 years
initially. Yeah. It's a short stint.
Obviously, there's a whole layer of like prison industrial complex, the police, all that's intertwined with this. But essentially, it's a guy who commits a pretty minor crime, gets a pretty severe sentence for it. But instead of, writing it out or finding a way to make peace with it, he's constantly rebelling against everything. He's rebelling against the entire concept of being in prison. He rebels against the social system within the prison itself among the inmates. And he's seen as a hero and a Christ figure. The Christ stuff is like, I don't know about that. Didn't really play all that well to me. It's like that sort of works, but not really. But it's clear that he's a hero for fighting against these sort of social norms that exist. But I don't know. There's something about it that seems really naive to me, that this is, and it feels very honest to me and authentic that was a collective message coming out of this decade, of course, going into the 60s, where there's a huge cultural revolution in the United States, which is often about this, taking out institutions, questioning capitalism, all this sort of stuff. But it's, I always go to like how in our society, especially like late capitalist society, we commodify everything. And that rebellion, the rebellion we see in these movies, Without a Cause, Cool Hand Luke, was all commodified within a couple of decades. And it's just, I don't know. I'm going off on a tangent per usual.
No, I think
sticks out to me is I can't figure out what they're rebelling against.
Okay,
like what is it?
So I do. So, and I think Cool Hand Luke does it a little more cleanly. And I think that, everybody's mileage is going to vary in 2023 when it comes to Christ imagery. Yeah. But I mean, essentially, and Matt Zoller Seitz on RogerEbert.com has an excellent essay about this, because he essentially watched Cool Hand Luke in 4 different decades and does a breakdown of like how it plays different, 10 years later. And I think he hits the nail on the head in that essentially it comes down to the prison. That here it's literally the prison industrial complex, and you could apply that allegory to basically any other of these movies. The LAPD in LA Confidential, right? Sure. Yeah. The domestic family unit in This Boy's Life. Yeah. These are all like different forms of imprisonment, and so then that Christ-like figure kind of comes back to, you need somebody. And he mentions this quote in particular, more so than the actual like imagery is when Luke says, he's like screaming as he's like, caught for the umpteenth time trying to escape. And he says like, stop feeding off me. Where it's like not only a rebellion against that system that you're stuck in, you're boxed in by, but also against this like notion of like leaders being like prophetized and seen as the only way out. I mean, it's not a coincidence either, and Zoller Seitz says this in his essay too, which I think is pretty on the nose, is like the 60s is also the Beatles bigger than Jesus decade. So you've got you could easily make those kind of parallels in all the other decades as well. And I mean, that's part of cinema's job too, for better or worse. Maybe it's one of its like embedded faults, is that like we not only go there to escape and to like have catharsis from our own human experience, but we also go there to like idolize.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think it's interesting to kind of look at that through the lens of some of the more recent movies. Like I'm totally, maybe that's my issue. I'm totally sucked in to Asteroid City because of my idolization of Wes Anderson. I'm totally sucked in to The Tree of Life because my idolization for Terrence Malick. So it's just like auteurs like taking the place of these rebel figures in the narratives of these films.
No, I could definitely see that. I mean, the sort of use of iconography in Cool Hand Luke is interesting because, like you say, what makes that film special or makes it sort of pop, at least to me, is that transformation of Luke going from this outsider who's rebellious, and the transition happens, you know, kind of gradually. It's first the fight where he doesn't sort of give up and, you know, basically gets beaten nearly to death. And then it's the famous hard-boiled egg scene. And what's interesting about it is we see this transformation of an outsider into, you know, some sort of like savior figure to these prisoners. But even within that, and like you point out, it undercuts it. Like there's the whole part where he sends the photograph in the magazine and it's with the two beautiful women, and the entire prison camp is like enthralled with this photo. Yeah. It's almost like one of those saint cards or something. And it gives them hope. It gives them a sense of freedom. But then when you remember he gets caught and comes back and basically says, well, this is all made up. This wasn't even a real thing. And then the guy rips it up. There is that constant kind of back and forth of they need somebody like this to get them through the day and give them hope. But it's also a false prophet. Yeah. And it's like this back and forth, which gives the film a lot of interesting tension. I mean, even at the end, I forget his name, but George Kennedy, who won the Oscar, you know, plays a supporting actor. Yes. He, you know, kind of acts as like the Judas at the end of the church scene and kind of gives him up and then basically gets him killed. But then the end of the movie is him telling this story about how he was smiling when they're wheeling him off. It's like that. Like, that's what really gives it to me a lot of the inertia and power, is that it doesn't really play it one way or the other. It tries to sort of weave in and out, and it doesn't clearly say that like, oh, you know, all these prophets are false, or they don't, you know, they're not needed. It also says both. It says they are needed and gives people hope, but they're also kind of false at the same time. You know? Yeah.
I think that like. Maybe that's, and it kind of comes back to this idea of Cool Hand Luke being so kind of sparse when it comes to these kinds of thematics and characterizations, where it's like, and maybe that's why it hits so hard. I don't know. I mean, we briefly talked about this when we, because you watched it for the first time, right?
Yeah, I've never seen it before.
Right. And this was probably my third or fourth watch, but definitely my first watch in a while, where, you know, number one, it hits way different as an adult, I think, because like I probably watched it the first 2 or 3 times, like either in my late teens or early 20s. And also you have this kind of I don't want to. I don't know. Would you say it's not? Would you say it's nihilist?
Yeah. I think that there is an undercurrent that kind of screams of nihilism,
right? Which becomes more and more definitive as the film nears its, you know, inevitable conclusion.
Yeah, but you could make an argument that it's more like existentialist nihilism.
Sure. Okay.
Like, you know, he's rebelling against something deeper than just the institution. He's rebelling against life itself or something. Yeah. You know? And like the trapped nature of those that have idolized him in the prison. And I think that's just like so much starker than all of the other films. Maybe
maybe with the one exception of Lenny.
Yeah, Lenny's pretty dark.
Right. It ends, on a not so great note. Or maybe Last Picture Show too, but there is still kind of this like
there's a hope there.
There's a little, there's a glimmer of hope. And there's at least a glimmer of hope in all the other films, if not more. And so I think that it's quite interesting then going back, kind of circling back to like my theory about, as the further we get from the decade, is this just like, this is how nostalgia works, right? The further we get away from it's like Cool Hand Luke, no hope. Last Picture Show, glimmer of hope. Desert Hearts, optimistic, but also very like frank about the discrimination of women and gay people. And then, it kind of goes on from there. LA Confidential has like this triumphant victory at the end, but also the suggestion that it's going to continue on, right?
Yeah, he's just perpetuating the corruption that created the city.
Yeah.
But there's none of these are as stark as Cool Hand Luke.
Right.
It's just like this almost guttural sense of it feels very New Hollywood, right? Yeah. 67, right during the start of that sort of period, and it has that vibe to it. It's like there's no holding back in sort of the messaging, I would say.
Right. What did you think? To kind of touch on this New Hollywood aspect, because that's kind of another kicker, especially when we transition to talking about Rebel Without a Cause. Yeah. And how, there's lots of similarities and parallels, but also a very distinctly different directing style and acting style, right? That schism between the 50s and 60s in terms of cinematic history. I'm curious what you thought, having just watched it for the first time, and in succession order with all the other movies we did episodes about that were set in the 50s, like, because you didn't see, I guess I should ask, did you kind of see the ending coming from a mile away?
In Cool Hand
Luke? Yeah.
No, I had no idea. Yeah.
Because that's one of the things that was like, I remember being fascinated by as a young person watching this. It was one of my earliest memories of like seeing a classic movie that didn't like hinge on like a very clear plot, right? Like it's characterization.
It's almost like vignettes almost connected together. Yeah.
And that feeling of it, because once again, I went into my first viewing of it, I believe, not knowing where it was going, and that kind of like gut punch of the ending, because we're just like so socialized at a very young age to think that like if there is a rebel going up against an institution, the only way to like end that narratively in a satisfying way is to have them, emerge victorious, right?
Yeah, win in some way. But I think that like you could argue that Luke wins, right, on some level.
How?
Because he never acquiesces.
Right?
Like,
He
never like, bends to the knee, so to speak, and like bows down before them. But that is such a style of this time in American cinema. It really is. Like, I think it lands differently now as someone, especially because the way film has gone over the last, I would say 10 years, 10, 15 years, where there's been a lot of resurgence of that style in terms of the starkness. I'm thinking of like movies like Uncut Gems or Good Time. Like, there's just this, there's a built-in sense of, this could end poorly. And that's okay. That's not that shocking. But I can imagine back in 1967, someone going to see this, it's a prison movie. It's a guys rebel against the authority movie. Obviously, they're going to come out okay. They're going to escape from prison, like The Town. God, I hate the end of that movie. It's like they get away. They get away. It's like a happy ending. And it actually kind of reminded me a little bit of a prison movie that came out in the 40s, Brute Force.
I don't know. No.
With Burt Lancaster. Okay. Very violent film. Like, you see this movie and you're like, well, this is absurd that they released this back in the 40s. I mean, this is disgusting. And it ends like very awfully. Like bad in terms of like what happens to the characters. And I was like, oh yeah, it's kind of like that to some degree, where they rebel and they kind of lose. A lot of them don't make it. And yeah, with Cool Hand Luke, I do think that there's an existentialism was really big in the United States in the 60s and 50s.
Right.
So it's like there's a sense, it kind of reminds me a little bit of The Stranger by Camus. Yeah. Right. Where it's just, this guy is kind of doomed on some level, but he still is able to sort of keep a sense of individuality and power over his life.
Right. He never kowtows to the system that has oppressed him.
Yeah. Even though he's basically condemned to death.
Right. Yeah. So like, where would you place this in, especially having just seen it for the first time, among like your usual, stable of 60s New Hollywood, kind of the biggest, maybe other ones to mark your comparisons with be like Bonnie and Clyde, and what else comes to mind for New Hollywood? The first, The Graduate, right? Same year, 67. 67. Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. Do you think, I don't know,
this has got to be high up there.
Okay.
I mean, to me, it has its problems, and there's some stuff that doesn't work for me.
The car wash.
That worked great for me. I don't know what you're talking about. That's such a scene where you're like, oh yeah, this is the thing about it too, is it doesn't actually look, I don't know whatever version I saw, it looks beautiful.
It does.
The cinema, whoever did the sort of restoration on this thing is just, it looks so crisp and wonderful. But yeah, scenes like that, you're like, is this Porky's? Is this like, it's so bizarre, but it doesn't, you know, it's just like, why would they, but it makes sense within the story and like all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I would put it way high up there just because, it could have easily became like a B movie prison movie, which is a whole exploitation type film, right?
Yeah.
It could easily become that, but it transcends that basically immediately from the first moment. And there's some gorgeous scenes.
Yes.
I mean, just the interplay between the actors, especially like the one that sticks out to me is when he says goodbye to his mother.
I was just going to mention that. Yes.
Like, God, that's
one
of you normally see in a movie, major studio film. Like it just was too much, too emotional for mainstream.
And that's one of those scenes too, where it's like, as an adult, right? With, now, we're basically at the point where, our parents are becoming elderly, and we're, preparing to say our goodbyes. It could be any day. And,
exactly.
I think what makes it special for me, at least on this most recent viewing, as, a near 40-year-old, is like, there is this kind of playfulness that maybe was more resonant to me as a young person, that kind of, almost mirrors the, like, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, when we're talking about like rebelling against the system and people feeling imprisoned, or even like Shawshank Redemption, right? Would be also, it mostly takes place in the 40s, but, second half of the film, I think, is probably in the 50s. Where it's like, I feel more of like the internal stuff going on, and Paul Newman, I mean, it goes without saying, but like his performance you can see that in so many different ways, but you especially can see it on like two very different levels when you're watching it from the perspective as like one of his fellow inmates versus as someone who is like just so sick of the systems and has like tried surviving them for so long. Not to say that like I'm going to like do anything like that, but that's part of that catharsis too, where it's like we become more interested and more empathetic to this plight of somebody who feels like they're like, about they should be about halfway through their life, but the doom of everything around them affects them internally, even if they, can be the most popular, top dog of the place they're at. And that feels both complicated and simple in a way that, like, I don't imagine any other actor could have really done. And there were so many amazing actors, during the New Hollywood era. I just, it's so difficult to kind of imagine how in one movie you've got James Dean with, like, the classic tragic young death, and Paul Newman is, like, capturing that, and yet he still managed to, like, not only be a good actor, but be a good person. And, like, it almost feels like he was kind of living that the way that you would hope actors would when they play, like, this kind of complex role that has so much humanity to it.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubting that his performance here, and I don't think, was he nominated for Best Actor? I don't think he was.
Maybe not.
Yeah, I mean, George Kennedy won for Best Supporting Actor,
right,
but he definitely didn't win. Paul Newman didn't win. Yeah, the performance is, like, off the charts. Like, the ability to, on the one hand, be so smooth, so cool, and sort of express that externally. But it's those little moments and nuances of the way, he walks or puts his hand a certain way or looks a certain way, his facial expressions, that detail to us as the viewer that, there's something else and something more going on here. It's not just a guy who is rebelling because he's angry or filled with rage.
Or disturbed mentally,
Yeah, he's not disturbed. Like, there's something deeper going on there. And I think that Paul Newman's, like, famous for this, but it's this sort of calmness and coolness to his demeanor. It sort of pulls us in deeper into his emotional state of being. And when we get there, we realize that, like, oh, it's pretty mysterious. Yeah. Like, his motivations, why he's doing what he's doing. He doesn't seem like there's some simple motivation for why he's rebelling. I think, and that's maybe for me the frustrating part of his character. Right. Because and you see this with the inmates. They're just like, just give up. Like, just stop. Just stop fighting. And I found that was fascinating because on the one hand, they do that in the fist fight where he's fighting George Kennedy's character. But then when he gives up by when the wardens and stuff are making him dig the ditch over, or the grave over and over again, and he gives up and placates, they kind of look at him in disgust. And it's just sort of like this, he's an unknowable person, I think, and he's an unknowable character. And I think that's always intriguing because that's kind of how we all are ultimately. Like, we never really know other people's motivations or what's going on with them, and we truly don't even know ourselves. Right. And so I think that's what makes this performance, and I think centers the film, obviously, and gives it a sense of, I don't know, there's just, you want to look at it again and try and figure it out, but you're not going to, but there's still this desire to kind of connect with it over and over again. I think, it's obviously just an unbelievable feat that he put on here. Right. And, I don't know. The ending of this story is so late 60s. Yeah. I mean, think about the end of, like, Night of the Living Dead. The hero is essentially shot by racists, and they, like, it's bleak as hell. But I think it, honestly, knowing what I know about that time period, a very honest and authentic expression of how people felt about society. Yeah. Right.
And I mean, it actually got me thinking, if you draw a parallel to a previous to our previous season of episodes, the stranger than fiction theme. It almost feels, I don't know, it seemed like a happy accident, because it's almost like these two ideas rhyme, is that even though, yes, much of these set in the 1950s films are fictional, there is still this kind of sense where it's like you both are in shock and awe of the representations on screen, and also it still feels, that's kind of like the point of having a period piece, even if it is in this case like 10 years prior, because not only is it's based on a novel written by an ex-con, right?
Yeah,
and
it was on Chain Gang, so yeah, it's
and like so much of like throughout the history of cinema is, you know, people drawing from not only their personal experiences, but like their personal understanding or, you know, take on what that period felt like. And one thing that stood out to me as well, going back to like the writing here, is so that's who wrote the novel, Don Pierce, and then who helped write the script was the same screenwriter who ends up doing Dog Day Afternoon with Sidney Lumet, you know, less than 10 years later, where you have this, once again, like that's an actual true story, and still kind of in this same vein of like these kinds of stranger than fiction moments happen, both in fiction and in real life, because of these like unknowable people that finally like can't take it anymore. And going network. There's another new Hollywood, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that the reason it still resonates today, because, you know, there's always that question of going back to last season as well. We were talking about like how even a movie like Compulsion with Orson Welles, it doesn't age well. Diner, we just talked about a couple episodes.
Did not age well.
Horribly.
Yeah, really poorly.
But the truth of it, at the heart of it, even if it's problematic, is that there is this, you know, palpable sense of like feeling lost and unsure what to do, and so it becomes conflict. And I don't know, I don't know. It feels like I am very glad to tease. I'm very eager to tease our upcoming season of episodes, cycle of episodes, because we're finally going to get away, I think, from this kind of like really, well, maybe not. It's going to probably be some pretty depressing stuff too, but it'll be more fun because
more action.
But we'll tease that at the end of the show. I don't know. Where do we go next from this?
Well, let's talk about Road Without a Cause. I mean, there's a lot of like depressing movies, right? I mean, it's ultimately, I mean, Road Without a Cause, you know, we wanted to end this with a movie that, you know, took place in the 50s, was written in the 50s and shot in the 50s. And so Road Without a Cause is 1955, essentially, you know, based on a book, I think from the 40s? Yeah, 1944. Road Without a Cause, the hypnoanalysis of a criminal psychopath, which is written by an actual psychologist about a young man in a Pennsylvania prison who is, you know, a sociopath. And it goes through all of these, you know, different scripting stages in the late 40s, bounced around Warner Brothers and all of that. Marlon Brando does a screen test in 1947 and eventually gets greenlit after Nicholas Ray kind of rewrites it and changes the story a lot to sort of get away from this concept of like criminally insane young people towards just sort of juvenile delinquency, and you know essentially creates this concept of the modern teenager is what people say that this movie does and this script does. But once Nicholas Ray gets a hold of it, it gets a lot of sort of inertia and and then obviously you know, when they cast James Dean then it he was just on the cusp of stardom. I don't think East of Eden was out yet, but then they're shooting Rebel Without a Cause as a B movie in black and white, but James Dean becomes a star as they're shooting it, and so they have to redo everything and say, we want this in color, bigger budget, cut everybody else besides him in the movie to some degree. And it really, I had never seen it before, and it has such a reputation. I mean, a massive reputation to this day, as people that were born 30 plus years after it came out. It for whatever reason, it has stuck around. And after I was watching it, I love Nicholas Ray, a great director. And I'm thinking of what was my favorite. In a Lonely Place, he did.
Yes,
with
Bogart.
Bogart. Unbelievable film. One of my favorite films from that era. Looking at it now, and this is going to feel, a little bit spicy, perhaps.
Ooh.
It feels like one of those movies that meant a lot when it came out, and changed the way that people thought about maybe teenagers and people of that age, and maybe about the suburbs and all that sort of stuff. But as I watch it now, it just feels, the messaging feels more on the slight side than this sort of monumental defining picture of the 1950s. I know that's probably slanderous to even suggest, but that's how it felt to me. Like, obviously I'm a viewer who's seen it, 50, 60 years later.
No, I mean, I think that kind of, we mentioned this at the top of the episode, is, James Dean's reputation alone precedes itself as a cultural figure, and everything from heartthrob to tragic story. You take that in consideration, along with the fact that the film itself, the pieces of it that have stood the test of time have all been imagistic in nature, right? Like the coiffed pompadour, the chicken race. These aren't fully fleshed out. This is not a part of the cultural fabric of cinema same way that Cool Hand Luke is, I would say.
Yeah.
And I think just the word that kept coming to my mind, there was lots of things that I think are admirable about the film because of the cast and crew involved. But the word that kept running through my mind is, this is melodrama. This is not
totally
an attempt at neorealism. This is as far from Bicycle Thieves as you could imagine.
Exactly.
In terms of presenting a slice of life type of story. What do you think is the main thing that's keeping it back, especially for somebody like Nicholas Ray? Maybe I'm going to answer my own question, but
sure.
he was, one of those classic, apprentice type directors. And so he made a lot of amazing work in genre pictures. Is that what we're dealing with here? Is this a modest attempt that became it ended up having a reputation that preceded itself because this was him kind of stepping outside of his noir-y wheelhouse?
Yeah, I mean, I think that what works here is these flashes and moments of just pure cinema, as Martin Scorsese would say.
Yes.
I mean, truly though, and the stuff that sticks out to me is the brutality of the knife fight.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And how vicious these teenagers are. I mean, can you imagine seeing this in the 1950s?
Yeah. And myself as a teacher is just when that happens outside the observatory, I'm just where the hell are the teachers? What is
I find that whole scene interesting because one of the little tidbits here is that when they originally shot that, they shot that portion in black and white, and they had a ton of extras.
Sure.
But when they got the green light, you got to go back and shoot it in color, they lost a lot of the extras. So the scene plays a lot more isolated. It's almost this small little pack of people that are attacking him. And there's something about it that makes me so uncomfortable because Jim, right, that's his character, he doesn't want to fight. He doesn't want to get involved. He doesn't want to, play whatever machismo game that these guys are playing, but he's sort of forced into it. And there's such a sense of like desperation and danger and violence. And then what's the girl's name? Judy?
Yeah.
Wow. I mean, like, what a character. Like the way that she like weaves in and out of on his side, not, intrigued by this bad boy, but then also hates him and joins the pack against him. Really crazy stuff. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of... It's super over the top.
Right. Well, we never even mentioned like the homoeroticism in Kool Hand Luke. But it's also happening here with Plato, Sal Minio's character.
Yeah. And the Breen office was like, this is not good. You can't be doing this. Right? I mean, because it's considered the first... I don't know if this is true, but they said this somewhere, like AFI, that like considered one of the first homosexual young men on screen, like explicitly, but it's not that explicit. But
it's still also technically explicit. Yeah, right. It's explicit in the same way that like Peter Lorre was explicitly gay in all of his movies.
Exactly.
What is because I'm interested in this like trajectory, because it kind of hits on what I was just referring to, like connecting this to this stranger than fiction idea. Because it originates as like this nonfiction analysis of the teenage, especially like sociopathic teenage mind, or juvenile delinquent is the phrase that I see a lot in like the backstories of this film. What is like, how do we get from this kind of self-serious psychoanalytical study of the teenage mind to what ends up becoming like the touchstone kind of reference point for the stereotypical teenage rebel that is either literally in the final product of this film, after James Dean profile was raised and they go back and reshoot in color and all that, as well as like the enduring images that have lasted. I mean, I think that there's this, I don't know, it is not a great film like so many of the other great films of this era, and yet there's something that feels just like super important about the origin of how we, as a culture, as a society in America, like misdiagnose and misunderstand teenagers.
Yeah, I mean, I think that like what makes this film stick around ultimately, and like where it has its stature, is in two things. One, it's obviously Ray, like the way he brings the story to life in the sensationalism, like that. As you said, he's kind of a genre guy, and so he can do the B movie stuff really freaking well. And the best scenes in this are kind of the B movie scenes where they're overacting and the drama is super heightened. But I honestly think it's James Dean.
Yeah.
Right. Like he's, he was always like criticized as trying to be like Marlon Brando, especially East of Eden. Here he's on a different plane. Right. Yeah. Can you think of a similar character that you have seen in a movie like this where he inhabits so many different layers of masculinity and femininity at the same time? Like he is just up and down, and he never settles on a singular identity or psyche that would be comfortable with social norms. Right. He's really out there. And I think that like that's one of the which I find fascinating, because that has been sanitized from this.
Right.
Completely sanitized. Because when you think of James Dean, you ask anybody in like the middle of Nowheresville in the world, they know who James Dean is, and they're like, what? He wears like a white t-shirt and like jeans.
Yeah.
And they're rolled up and there's a pack of cigarettes on the side, and he's like super cool. But when you watch this movie, this guy's not cool.
No. He's like one of my favorite moments is like him rolling around in the plants in the driveway with Natalie Wood, and like just like almost feels like an SNL sketch of like, a character of a guy that can't like control his body.
He's like a loon, man. He's a total loon. But I think that like there's something that we've lost in that, where it's like, I don't know. I do wonder when people saw this back in the 50s, were they like, well, this guy's crazy, or this guy's whatever.
Yeah.
You know, and I think the fact that he was killed, 6 months after this came out, like, he had just finished filming Giant, and he died in like that September of that year. You know, it's sort of, he was frozen in time in a sense. Yeah. And I think that's, you know, we love that for some reason. People love when people die young. I don't really get it.
I know another, you know, young idol that died too young and was frozen in time and became known as the Messiah of a certain religion. Ah,
Jesus. Here we go. Although he was 24, not 33.
True. Good point.
But yeah, I think that I don't know the answer to that question, but I think it's his early death. It's Ray making a sensational B movie, like really heightened with good money, like just really swings the fences.
Yes.
He's so good at melodrama. He's amazing. I mean, In a Lonely Place is like an amazing melodrama, but it's like subdued, and like him subdued is like perfection.
Yeah.
But like, this is where it's just like, you know, blowing everything up essentially.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, I think I think it's almost unfortunate, because I think the true story in this movie is the weirdness of James Dean.
Yeah. And
like, it's so odd.
And there's notes from, you know, that time period where even if audiences perhaps took it a different way because of the marketing and sensational profile of James Dean, but like people on set were like, this guy's weird. This guy is improvising a lot, and yet like there's like differing accounts from fellow cast members and then crew members, including what's his name, Sal Mineo, where he's like
Plato,
who played Plato, where like it almost felt like he was trying to like change the trajectory of the character in real time.
You can see that on screen.
Yeah.
Like, no one's telling him to act that way. That's
just him being him.
Yeah. And I think Nicholas Ray had a really close, sometimes too close, relationship with his actors.
Right.
And Natalie Wood, of course. But really, I mean, nurtured James Dean a lot, and basically gave him a lot of leeway. And that's, you know, that's what we get on screen. Right. But I do wonder, like, why doesn't the reputation of, or sort of the legend of this movie include that part of it? Why?
Yeah,
you know?
Yeah. And I think it's going back to your point about like him kind of sliding in and out of masculinity, femininity, heterosexuality and homosexuality. That in particular feels like it's just like ripe for a reassessment.
Totally.
In the 2020s.
Yeah. Why are Zoomers not jumping all over this?
I know, right?
Yeah. It's crazy.
But it's just, it has to be part of that like reputation preceding itself thing. I think that there's a lot going for this movie to like call for that. And yet, it's weird, the things that have, you know, been kind of reshaped. I had a very strong reaction to finally realizing that like the observatory, that like this is the movie with the, you know, classic Hollywood observatory, and I just like became like red with anger. It's like, okay, now we need to lock up Damien Chazelle for what he did in La La Land.
Come on. Love La La Land.
but that's the iconography piece too, where it's like, I mean, even for like a musical in 2020 whatever, 2017, I
think,
but it's like repurposed. I mean, I don't know. We don't need to.
That's like a postmodern pastiche thing. It's like,
right.
You guys know this from cinema. Even if you've never seen the movie, you know it.
But that's kind of that sanitization as well, right? Where it's like
100%.
Postmodern pastiche, but not the gay stuff. Postmodern pastiche, but not the weird stuff. Like,
yeah, they just take the spring clean of the coolness of James Dean and put it in Ryan Gosling's tap shoes. You know what I mean?
Yes. Oh my god!
What a movie, masterpiece.
Okay, we'll probably have to have a musicals.
Oh, dude, it was so much fun.
Okay, do you want to do some trivia?
Let's do some trivia.
Okay,
let's do it.
So if you don't recall, dear listeners, and Dan, I'm going to read the opening narration or stage directions from the screenplay of 5 different films, all take place in the 1950s, and the added twist this time for our finale episode, they're all movies like Rebel Without a Cause that also were shot and released in the 1950s.
Oh, cool. All right.
In fact, they're arguably 5 of the most famous films of the 50s. Right. So we were talking about a lot of depressing stuff. I'm trying to end on a hopeful note. I think you're going to get most of these.
No, I would doubt that.
I'm setting you up for failure.
I'm so bad at this game.
First one. Fade in. Exterior. New York Court of General Sessions. Day. A large, imposing building, gray, impressive as a background for the comings and goings of a number of ordinary people on an ordinary day. Camera holds on steps and building front from the distance and then dollies in slowly. Dissolve 2. Interior. The lobby. Seething with activity, people of all kinds walking swiftly, purposely to and from elevators, newsstands, etc., others standing, waiting, guards stationed at various posts. Camera pans across lobby and then dollies into a bank of elevators. A number of people crowd into one of them. The door closes.
12 Men?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Good. All right. Fish in a barrel.
That's like the only 50s.
Oh, no. Okay.
Unless it was like some like vague noir film, I probably don't know it.
Okay. Yeah, I don't think I got any noirs for you, but I think this is noir adjacent, so let's give this one a try. Fade in, interior apartment, day, long shot. Although we do not see the foreground window frame, we see the whole background of a Greenwich Village street. We can see the rear of a number of assorted houses and small apartment buildings whose fronts face on the next crosstown street, sharply etched by the morning sun. Some are 2 stories high, others 3. Some have peaked roofs, others are flat. There's a mixture of brick and wood and wrought iron in the construction. The apartment buildings have fire escapes, the others do not.
Oh, this one, I think rear window.
Yeah, nice work.
That's
okay. Oh my gosh.
I've actually seen that. So.
Yeah. And the way that Hitchcock wrote his scripts in addition to filmed his movies.
Yeah.
Okay. Here we go. This one. Yeah, no, this one's noir adjacent too, if not just straight up noir. Start the pic. I like the. Oh man, this guy had an interesting screenplay writing style too. Sequence A. Start the picture with the actual street sign, stenciled on a curb stop. In the gutter lie dead leaves, scraps of paper, burnt matches, and cigarette butts. It is early morning. Now the camera leaves the sign and moves east, the gray asphalt of the street filling the screen as speed accelerates to around 40 miles an hour. Traffic demarcations, white arrows, speed limit warnings, manhole covers, etc. flash by. Street sign.
Street signs?
Noir adjacent, depending on who
Vertigo?
you ask. No, Sunset Boulevard.
Oh yeah, 1950. Speaking of which, same house at the end of Rebel Without a Cause.
Oh yeah,
That's the Getty Mansion.
Incredible. Okay, it's okay. You're 2 for 3.
2 for 3.
Number 4. Fade in. City at night. A hearse of late 20s vintage is proceeding at a dignified pace along a half-deserted, wintry street. Inside the hearse, there are 4 somber men in black, and a coffin, of course, with a wreath of chrysanthemums on top. One of the men is driving, another is in the seat beside him. The other 2 are sitting in the rear of the hearse, flanking the coffin. All 4 seem fully aware of the solemnity of the occasion. Now they hear a siren. Do you know it?
No idea. On the waterfront?
No, good guess. Very good guess. Yeah, we didn't even talk about Brando, did we?
Yeah.
Not a melodrama at all. It's actually a comedy, though it is also in black and white. 1959.
What was it again? Sorry, I missed that.
1959. Comedy involving
The Apartment.
Oh, you got right cast member.
Sound like a hot.
There you go. There you go.
Yeah.
Good. I'm going to give you a half point on that one.
All right,
and
cool.
last but not least, Fade In, Interior Dining Hall, Sarah Siddon Society, Night. It is not a large room and jammed with tables, mostly 4, but some for 6 and 8. A long table of honor for about 30 people has been placed upon a dais. Dinner's over, Demi tosses cigars and brandy. The overall effect is of worn elegance and dogged gentility. It is June. The camera, as it has been throughout the credit titles, is on the Sarah Siddons Award. It is a gold statuette about a foot high of Sarah Siddons as the tragic muse. Exquisitely framed in a nest of flowers, it rests on a miniature altar in the center of the table of honor.
Yikes. This probably should be easy, huh?
It's a pretty big one. Best Picture winner, definitely like towards the top of the AFI Top 100. It, arguably, some people call it the first mainstream feminist film.
First mainstream feminist film.
1952.
52. Gilda?
Oh, good guess. It's another movie with a woman's name in the title, All About Eve.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Which I've actually never seen.
Oh, man. That's okay. We'll do our feminist series as well. Look at 3.5 out of 5. That's actually better than some of the past episodes.
Than I usually do. Way better. So 1950s. What do we think? We're gonna do another decade one soon? Probably not.
No. Let's. It was a good one, but it's exhausting.
Yeah, it's exhausting. Yeah, and it's hard to like. You would think the connections would just be there, but they're just not. Because it's like the way people depict a decade are so disparate that it's hard. Yeah, it's hard to see the themes.
Everybody's got their own set of rose-colored or nihilist-colored glasses, right?
Yeah.
You want to tease the next cycle of episodes?
Yeah, we'll tease it. How did we even come to this one? Oh, yeah, we wanted to do The Creator, which is coming out in like a week or so.
The buzz is good, Dan. The buzz is good.
Buzz is good. Yeah, but who's the lead again? John
David Washington. Goddamn.
Yeah, as our friend Molly says, he's like a charisma vacuum. I'm excited for that, but we're doing Future Wars. Ooh, so wars that take place in the future. We got 8 episodes this one, so it's supersized.
Yes.
A lot of great movies we're talking about. War of the Worlds, 2005, The Matrix, Terminator, Omega Man, Aliens, Starship Troopers, The Road, Doctor Strangelove, and a lot of other great films, Mad Max Fury Road. It's going to be a good one. It's going to be it's going to be different for us because I feel like in the past we've kind of purposely chosen films that we weren't maybe super familiar with that would stretch us a little bit. And this one we're going to be in like some comfort zones. Right. So I wonder, I think
a lot of fan favorites.
Yeah. I think it's going to lead to some interesting conversation. A lot of like ranting and fighting, I feel like is going to happen this season.
We are prone to fighting, especially about science fiction films. Yes. But it's also a cool little theme because it doesn't exclusively feature science fiction films.
Yeah, true.
I think that it's going to be a fun one, and we're booking the guests right now. We're be coming at you sometime in October, probably.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. All right, thanks for listening. This has been Film Trace.